joining me now for more on this from Chicago is Zaher Sahloul. He's a senior advisor to the Syrian American Medical Society. Thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Sahloul. Now, this UN report is damning on both sides. You were in Aleppo while the battle was raging there. Did you see some of these crimes being committed, be it bombs containing chlorine gas or human shields being used by rebel fighters?
Oh, definitely. I was in eastern Aleppo and I worked in a hospital that is built underground for protection of doctors and nurses. I visited 7 hospitals. All of them were targeted frequently by the Syrian regime and by the Russian jets before I came in. And I've witnessed a school that is built underground. I visited an orphanage that is built underground because there were relentless bombing with helicopters and jets every day in the past few months. Aleppo was the epicenter of the war crimes in Syria, and all victims that I've treated, most of them were civilians, were victims of war crimes. These are civilians who are living in their homes and their schools and even in the hospitals, and they're targeted there. So yes, I witnessed, and many of my colleagues, the impact of these war crimes every day.
Well, that's the war crimes specifically on the Syrian regime side. Did you see the use of human shields by the rebel groups fighting there?
I mean, it's difficult to say that. The rebels are part of the people of eastern Aleppo. I did not visit western Aleppo, which is the area that is controlled by the government. And yes, they might have been some use of artillery by the rebels against western Aleppo, but that's really pale in comparison to what has been used by the Syrian regime and the Russians against the civilians in eastern Aleppo. Let's not forget that the Syrian regime and the Russian have used cluster bomb, barrel bombs, incendiary bombs, even chemical weapons, including chlorine, multiple times on Aleppo civilians. And all of these are crimes against humanity that are documented in this report.
And what's the situation now in Aleppo? As obviously, you're in Chicago at the moment. You were there. The regime have retaken control of eastern Aleppo. How are medical facilities now for the people living there currently?
What we know that the eastern part, that's the part that was surrounded by the regime, was under siege, undermining where the chemical weapons are used, so has been completely evacuated by civilians. The 180,000 people who are living there were forcefully expelled from their homes and neighborhoods. And there right now, many of them are dispersed and displaced in Idlib or other parts of Syria, where they also are under bombing. So it's completely deserted or near completely deserted. My understanding that the neighborhoods are empty and the hospitals are not being used. Most of them are bombed and are out of service. Western side of Aleppo is a different story. It's life as normal. It's under the control of the government. And civilians and hospitals and schools are operating as usual.
And finally, then, Doctor, of course, this is the latest UN report to mention war crimes and the use of chemical weapons. Where does this go from here? What can the international community actually do to make sure that those people who committed these crimes are answerable?
That's an excellent question, and I think we've seen many of these reports that documents the crimes against humanity, the genocide that is happening in Syria against civilians, the use of chemical weapons that became the new normal. And in spite of that, all of these reports have led to nothing. People are expecting accountability. People are expecting that the culprits for these these war crimes, whether they are the Syrian regime or the rebels or the Russians, should face the court of law one day. And so far, what we are seeing that these reports are attracting some attention by the media. People are reading it, and they will say, yes, there's war crimes, but they are collecting dust in the files of the United Nations, and they're not leading to the accountability that everyone in Syria and the region is looking for.
Okay, Dr. Zaher Sahloul from the Syrian American Medical Society, thanks for joining us.